Welcome back. Our second part of energy flow through is on biological productivity. There are two terms that you need to be familiar with when you talk about biological productivity. The first one is biomass. This is a measure of the total amount of organic matter on any trophic level in the ecosystem or on Earth that you're looking at. This type of unit is going to be measured in the amount of grams or tons, whatever you have, per unit surface area. The second term is biological primary productivity. In this, it's a measure of the amount of solar energy captured by the producers in an ecosystem in a given amount of time. So it's a rate. This is going to be measured by either one of three ways: biomass produced, oxygen produced, or carbon dioxide consumed. Remember, because it is a rate, the formula has time in it. There are two types of biological productivity. I just mentioned the one called primary productivity, which is the one we typically see measured. This is what the producers are doing as they convert solar energy into organic matter, usually due to photosynthesis. The second one is secondary productivity. Occasionally, you'll want to know how energy is being transferred at this level. So this is what the herbivores are doing. They're going to take the energy and transform it into their own organic compounds. And you would measure this by typically the amount of biomass increase over time. Let's look at some terms that relate to primary productivity. Solar energy. Turns out that producers are only able to capture around 1% of the solar energy that is striking them. Around the other 95% is either reflected or even passes through them without being absorbed. Of that gross primary productivity, 60% is lost to cell respiration, meaning this is the amount that the organism uses just to keep itself alive. So this is going to be transformed typically into heat. Then the net primary productivity winds up being the 40% that winds up being turned into biomass. Here's the formula that you'll want to use. Let's work a problem. The GPP of the producers in the area, large rainforest trees, is 0.0050 grams per centimeter squared per day. Cell respiration done to keep the trees alive consumes about 25% of this productivity. Your task is to calculate the net primary productivity. First off, when you see a problem like this, circle the terms that involve numbers. Secondly, make sure that they're in a form that you can work with. 25%, although descriptive, is not really a term that you can work with in a calculation. So the first thing you do is convert that to a decimal. Remember that 25% is equal to 25 out of 100, and that's equal to 0.25. Now you have a term you can multiply. NPP would be 0.75 times the GPP. Remember that it's the amount that's not cell respiration. And so then you simply plug and chug your numbers. 0.75 times the 0.0005 grams per centimeter squared per day, and you get your number of 0.0000. Let me try that again. You can see it on the screen. The key thing here is always put your units. That's very important because we're actually measuring a something, a substance. Net primary productivity. It can vary among ecosystems, and you need to be familiar with which terrestrial biome or aquatic biome or aquatic zone would be the highest or would be the lowest. Energy transfer through trophic levels. We talked about this earlier in the previous slides where the average is about 10%. This is just a quick reminder of exactly why that occurs. First off, not all the food at that trophic level that is usable is eaten. And remember that much of that energy is converted to heat. rather than being stored as organic molecules. And as a result, this is going to limit the number of trophic levels, especially in terrestrial ecosystems. One of the big players here, let's take an example of the tigers. If you look at tigers, they eat often a type of deer. And in fact, it takes around 25 deer per year to keep a tiger alive. If you had a predator of tigers, in other words, a fifth trophic level, let's say that that predator had to eat 25 tigers per year. It would have to have a home range that's at least 25 times bigger than a tiger's home range. And a tiger's home range is a little bit larger than 25 square kilometers or 100 square miles. And that's even before we begin to talk about the 10% rule. So this predator must be able to run that kind of area on a regular basis, and it's just not physically possible. You can work problems with this now that you understand these concepts. Let's look at a ecosystem that involves red clover, or a food chain that involves red clover, grasshoppers, toads, black snakes, and hawks. Stop the slide and take a moment to answer all of these questions on your paper. If you chose that the consumer levels are 4, that's correct. And if you answered that the food chain is based on solar energy, that is also correct. If you chose that there are more grasshoppers than toads, you are right. And yes, the energy transfer is about equal at all levels, or around 10%. This is the number we'll use when we work problems. Let's go further. If the energy content of red clover is approximately 5,000 calories per square meter of land surface, what would the energy content of toads be in calories per square meter? Use your 10% rule, and you should determine that the toads have about 50 calories per square meter. All of this is based on the first law of thermodynamics, or the law of conservation, where energy is transformed from one form to another. And so I want you to avoid using the term created energy. That's a term that's not accurate, and so you want to avoid that. Secondly, the second law of thermodynamics, the law of increased entropy, is also at play here. This demonstrates it. Think about it. Every time you transform that energy, you're going to transform it from a more organized form, such as either visible light or something like ATP or starch or fat. You're going to transform it into a less useful, disorganized form. So the light is transformed into heat or infrared radiation, and the disorganized form of the ATP, starch, and fat are transformed into, again, heat itself. This is why ecosystems need a constant supply of energy. Energy cannot be recycled, which is different from matter and nutrients. The energy flow pyramids that we introduced earlier can also explain why Earth can support more people if they eat at a lower trophic level. If you eat salads, you are acting as a primary consumer. You're eating directly as an herbivore. There's lots and lots of energy. If you bump up that pyramid to the next level, and let's say you eat beef, at best you are acting as a secondary consumer. That's if the cattle are grass-fed. If you have cattle fed in a feedlot, more than likely they've been fed animal protein to help them grow faster, and as a result, you're actually bumped up to a tertiary consumer at that point. If you eat some type of seafood that is a high-level predator, such as a shark, you're going to be at least a level 4 or higher as far as your consumer. So be careful. I'm talking here about consumer levels. Remember that you'd bump it up 1 for a trophic level. So why do tertiary and quaternary species occur in low numbers in ecosystems? Keep that pyramid in mind as you recognize that the energy just decreases within the ecosystem that's available to them as you go up. And lastly, why are such species, levels 3 and higher, more vulnerable to extinction when ecosystems are disrupted? Anything that degrades that ecosystem so that it will not support as many prey is going to put those top predators at risk because there will just not be enough energy within the ecosystem to support them. And that brings us to the end. Now you should be able to answer that question, are polar bears endangered? If you would, please take a moment to write down your opinion, in other words, your claim, and then justify your idea with evidence. Should take you around 2 to 4 sentences. Bring this with you to class so that you can defend your answer.